Bonjour à tout le monde, je suis Jean-Paul et je serai votre modérateur sur cette édition de EquiTalks. Je suis par ailleurs défenseur des droits des personnes LGBT au Cameroun, so bienvenue. Hi everyone, thank you for joining us today for this session of EquiTalks. I'm Jean-Paul Enama. I am the Executive Director of Humanity First Cameroon, which is a LGBTI organization. So I will be your moderator. I'm a former participant of Global Rights Connection program of EquiTalks also. Thank you for joining us. So we are very thrilled to have you on board. We are very thrilled to have you on board, and note that this event is both in English and French, so you'll be recorded, and a link has been posted in the chat. So you have a language of sign also in American English and also in Quebec Sign Language. So make sure to view it very well and set the gallery view for you. Donc, comme je disais, cet événement sera entièrement bilingue en français et en anglais. Donc, vous aurez aussi le langage des signes, qui est le langage des signes américain, le langage des signes québécois. Donc, en tant que participant, regardez dans la galerie, vous verrez le langage des signes qui sera fait là. Merci. So, since we want to make this space very safe, so please avoid using informal language or other harmful language. So note that if you can probably be removed from this EquiTalks if you notice that you are using this type of language. So avoid it. And so bear in mind also that to tag us on social media by using the hashtag EquiTalks on Facebook, Twitter, WhatsApp, every every social media you are using. And yes, know that this event is also recorded. Donc, je vous en prie, veuillez ne pas avoir de langage de propos injurieux envers d'autres participants ou des propos discriminatoires. Il est probable que vous soyez retiré de la session. Et n'hésitez pas aussi à utiliser notre hashtag dans les réseaux sociaux, Facebook, WhatsApp, Twitter, LinkedIn, tous les autres réseaux sociaux que vous avez, et hashtag EquiTalks. Merci beaucoup. Je vais vous présenter. Voilà, je vais vous présenter, de vous faire accueillir Viviane Coutereau qui va nous ouvrir de manière solennelle les EquiTalks 2022. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Jean-Paul. My name is Juanita Gonzalez, and I am an education specialist with EquiTalks based in Vancouver, Canada. I would like to officially welcome you to the 2022 EquiTalks. Thank you all for being here with us today. We would like to start by acknowledging that EquiTalks' main office is located on the unceded Indigenous territories of the Ganeganhawa First Nation. Our work is also done on the unceded Indigenous territories of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabeg, Chippewa, Haudenosaunee, Wendat, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, Musqueam peoples. This event today happens to be just one day past the spring equinox, which is recognized by Indigenous peoples as a time of rebirth, change, and transformation. May this territorial acknowledgement today be also an invitation to renew our commitment to raising awareness of Indigenous presence and land rights in everyday life. Ces reconnaissances peuvent facilement être vite d'actions et de changements concrets, et donc devenir qu'un symbolique plutôt qu'une pratique qui mène au changement. Toute personne non autochtone a la responsabilité de réfléchir à la signification de reconnaître les impacts actuels du colonialisme. Les reconnaissances territoriales sont qu'un petit aspect qui contribue à combattre les structures coloniales et il est important d'aller au-delà et de s'engager chacune et chacun d'entre nous. Chez EquiTalks, dans toute l'organisation, nous nous engageons à apprendre continuellement et à faire évoluer notre façon de travailler dans nos partenariats et nos programmations afin de refléter les principes d'une approche décoloniale. Toute l'équipe a participé à des ateliers sur la sécurité culturelle autochtone l'été dernier et nous poursuivrons ces apprentissages cette année. Personally, this spring, I am committed to learning more about the nuances and differences of Spanish and British colonialism and continue making sense of my own story as a migrant, a woman, a mother, and a human rights educator from Latin America and a settler in these unceded lands. Recognizing the diverse identities of our participants and all that have gathered here today for these talks, I invite you to consider your connection to colonization and your role in decolonization. If you feel comfortable, please share a commitment in the chat. Defending human rights takes empathy, courage, conviction, and creativity. Today's event aims to draw out the heart and humanity of this work. We are so honored to hear life stories and reflections from our amazing lineup of human rights defenders and activists from around the world. Ali Sanou, Cindy Blackstock, Hadil Abou Soufeh, Jean-Paul Enama, and our keynote speaker, Mary Lawlor, the United Nations Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights defenders. Thank you so much for being here today with us. To reinforce the theme of the EquiTalks, we would like to invite you to participate in an activity. This activity, designed by PerCollab, aims to support connection, critical reflection, and empathy among all of us gathered here today. Deep listening is an important skill to deal with complexity and with change. This activity will help us collectively develop this skill and allow new insights to emerge to reflect on heart, humanity, and defending human rights. To participate, please click on the link provided in the chat. You will be sent to a website that reveals a lens through which to listen to the stories and experiences of our speakers. A randomly selected card will be displayed. Some of us will listen for courage. Some may listen for powers. Others may listen for differences coexisting or authenticity. There are 15 different lenses. Please read the card and keep the lens in mind. After the panel discussion, you will be invited to share through the chat or in the networking session the connections that you made or the questions that emerged as a result of your listening lens. Nous ne serions pas ici aujourd'hui sans les soutiens généraux de nos commanditaires. 12 entreprises socialement responsables ont fait confiance à EquiTalks, veulent contribuer à créer une culture des droits humains dans leur communauté et ont rendu cet événement possible. Merci. Notamment, la promesse TD Préagir, Par Corporation du Canada et Alliance Corporation sont tous des partenaires de longue date d'EquiTalks qui démontrent leur soutien à la mission d'EquiTalks. Cette mission, à laquelle nous croyons fermement, est de faire progresser l'égalité, la justice sociale et le respect de la dignité humaine grâce à des programmes d'éducation aux droits humains transformateurs au Canada et partout dans le monde. Around the world, EquiTalks training programs aim to strengthen the capacity of human rights defenders to carry out their work through approaches to education that promote positive social change. Our programs support human rights defenders working on various issues in different regions around the world, such as LGBTQ2I rights through our Act Together for Inclusion Fund, on disability rights, notably in the Middle East and North Africa, gender equality, women in decision-making, and the prevention of violence against women in East and West Africa, supporting civic engagement in mining communities in Haiti, and youth leadership, reconciliation, and anti-racism in Canada. With the ongoing pandemic and its devastating impacts, particularly on vulnerable groups, as well as current humanitarian crises like the ones in Ukraine, Yemen, and South Sudan, the need for human rights education and the role of human rights defenders is more important than ever. As you participate in the EquiTalks today, I invite you not only to listen, share, and question, but also to reflect on how these discussions can be transformed into action in your respective settings. On that note, I would like to officially welcome Mary Lawlor. We are so honored to have Mary with us today. After leading the Irish branch of Amnesty International for many years, she founded Frontline Defenders International Foundation for the Protection of Human Rights Defenders. She is an adjunct professor of business and human rights in the Center for Social Innovation at Trinity College, Dublin, and as the United Nations Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights defenders, she plays a key role in supporting human rights defenders around the world at a critical time, especially considering the political and social challenges imposed by the pandemic. Without further ado, please welcome Mary Lawlor.
Thank you very much, everybody. And I'm delighted to be here to join you for EquiTalks. And I would like to thank Equitas for making this event happen. I look forward to hearing from my fellow panelists as well. And it's a wonderful opportunity for me to engage with a whole new network of human rights defenders and supporters. I've been asked today to reflect a little bit on my 4 decades of working in human rights, what attracted me to the work, and in particular, what are the main lessons I've drawn from my career. So I got interested in human rights work through Sean McBride. He was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, the American Medal of Justice, and the Lenin Peace Prize. He was a founding member of Amnesty. I was picking him up from the airport. He'd been in Russia one night, midnight it was. And when we got home, he asked me to come in and help him with his mail. And he worked for 2 hours opening and responding to every letter he had got from people all over the world. And I just couldn't believe it, because he was in his 70s, and I couldn't believe that he still cared so much. And so I joined Amnesty International after that. But the best education I ever got was selling encyclopedias in Canada when I was 21. It taught me all the life skills you need: resilience, persistence, self-reliance and belief, and how to persuade people. I'd applied for a job that said education dealing with the public on a personal basis, and it turned out to be selling in encyclopedias. I decided to give it a go because I had no money for accommodation and they put you up. I also earned more money in those two months than I'd ever seen, to such an extent that when I was counting it in the plane coming back to Ireland, the air hostess said suspiciously, "Where did you get all that money?" I joined Amnesty International's board in 1975 and became director in 1988. At the time in 75, there was just a handful of us. What I learned there was how to develop a professional, sustainable organization, the importance of fundraising, and to ensure that staff and systems are in place to increase and motivate membership to take action on human rights abuses. Wins along the way were the ratification of the covenants on civil and political rights and economic, social, and cultural rights, the abolition of the death penalty, and the Irish section contributing to the release of many prisoners of conscience in collaboration with other organizations and friendly states. One of those the Irish section worked on was a woman called Vera Chiwa from Malawi, who was imprisoned for 11 years. She and her husband Orton were both in the same prison, but held separately. After her release, I was driving her around a mountain pass in the west of Ireland, and she sang "Should Old Acquaintance Be Forgot" as we drove. She told me she had sung that to her husband's body when she was brought to see him when he died in prison, and wanted to sing it for him again in freedom. Other standout experiences were when the Irish section organised a convoy of civil society from Ireland to the borders of Bosnia during the war, lobbying for an end to the war and stopping along the route to raise awareness about the atrocities that were happening. And in 1995, I went to Beijing for the Fourth World Conference on Women. And it was amazing, full of tears and laughter at the testimonies. The conference marked a significant turning point for the global agenda on gender equality. The Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action was adopted unanimously by 189 countries. When I was in Amnesty, I met Brother Hector, an elderly religious man who was working with indigenous people in the Amazon. And as he described, with eyes blazing, their horrendous situation, he kind of half rose out of the chair like that. And he suddenly realized what he'd done, and he said, "Forgive me, it's the spirit talking." And I think that is what it is about human rights defenders, their unquenchable spirit, even in the face of desperation and danger. And that's what got and still gets to me. In 1998, I attended the Paris Summit on human rights defenders, and I was blown away by their courage and their work. And I decided that I would want to concentrate all my energies on trying to protect human rights defenders. So I wanted to set up an organization to protect them round the clock that would be fast, flexible, and furious. I believed and still believe that human rights defenders help build civil and just society. Change generally comes from within, supported by outside states and regional, international NGOs and mechanisms. So I went to the only rich man I know who had supported me in Amnesty, and he gave me $3 million to set up the organization. I have to say, you know, I'm a great believer in luck and timing, and this was really lucky. His first baby had been born the night before, and so I think he would have just given anyone who had arrived at that time the money in that first day. He told me to go away and write a paper about what I wanted to do and come back in 2 days, which I did. And I still have that page. I left his office and I counted every single word in it to see how much each word was worth. But there have been so many human rights defenders who have inspired me that it's hard for me to pick out a few. But I keep coming back to two who have left indelible marks on me. One I knew, and the other person I only knew of. So, and I talked earlier about the spirit of these inspirational people. And I think this is what you get from these quotes. Anna Politkovskaya was a journalist and human rights defender who reported on conflict, human rights abuses, and corruption in Russia. She was shot dead in the elevator of her apartment in 2006 because of her work on the Chechen war. She said, "So each time I go there, people tell me things. They do so in the sincere hope that if I record what is actually happening, it will lead to change, to peace. Obviously, I am not to blame for what is going on, but the more I think about it, the more I would be betraying these people if I walked away. The only thing to do is to take this to the bitter end so that no one can say that when things became difficult, I ran away." Dr. Mudawi Ibrahim Adam from Sudan is an engineer and human rights defender whose organization SUDA works for the welfare and rights of the Sudanese people for many, many years. This is a man who's been imprisoned about 7 times. He has been held in police stations and prisons on open ground in freezing, wet, windy conditions without any shelter, in solitary confinement, in the infamous ghost houses. He's been brutally tortured. He is a man who has never given up, but continues to spread light and life into darkness and creates hope for those who can only hope. And he says, "I think we have no choice. If we want to live a decent life in our own country, we have to continue working with the people, struggling with them. We are struggling to make a change. We need the support of the international community. We need to feel that there are people behind us. It is a moral support. It has a deep meaning in the heart. It is not tangible. It is something that even when you close your eyes, you see people you haven't seen, you imagine their shapes, and they are holding your hand continually. There is a difference between the work of an NGO and the work of the Special Rapporteur on human rights defenders. NGOs, as I see them, act as a crowbar in the system. They create awareness, they educate, and they mobilize communities and people to take action. Often they give direct assistance to victims of human rights violations. They document human rights abuses and advocate for an end to them using the tools of campaigning and advocacy. The mandate of the Special Rapporteur, on the other hand, is to promote the effective implementation of the UN Declaration on Human Rights Defenders, which was adopted unanimously after 13 years negotiation, to study the development and challenges that human rights defenders face and to seek, receive, and respond to the situation of human rights defenders, to recommend effective strategies to better protection, and all of this done with through a gender perspective. I also do a report to the General Assembly and the Human Rights Council every year, and now that COVID is becoming more manageable, I'm allowed now go on country visits. I do 2 a year. But I think the added value of being Special Rapporteur is the direct access I have to states. As an NGO, the friendly states will meet with anyone. And even some hostile ones will go through the motions and meet some organizations. But the really hostile ones won't engage seriously with victims of abuses or those organizations that work for them. However, speaking to states is often like rolling a boulder up a hill, but at least they have to listen to me as Special Rapporteur. And I continue to chip away, as in Leonard Cohen's words, there is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. I started in the 70s, and the world was a pretty bleak place then. Over the course of my career, I've seen countries go up and down. And the one thing we know is that human rights violations will always be with us. And we just have to make our human rights work as natural as breathing. Some places are better, and some are worse than in the 70s. But thanks to human rights defenders and civil society, many are better. Military dictatorships in Latin America have been replaced by democracies. Apartheid is over. Violence has gone from Northern Ireland, and the Soviet Union has collapsed. These countries, all of them, still face big challenges, but change is possible, progress is possible. If human rights defenders are allowed and encouraged to do their legitimate peaceful work without being vilified, jailed, or murdered. And since then, the term human rights defender, including the specific situation of women human rights defenders and LGBTI human rights defenders have become more known. Protection mechanisms have been put in place in Latin America. The environment and climate change has become crucial, and the link between business and human rights abuses is more clearly understood and recognized. States have to realize that civil society and human rights defenders cannot be ignored. That's why they persecute those who challenge them. Repression is always a measure of their effectiveness, I think. Finally, there will always be people like you who seek to fight injustice and equality with madness and a little bit of hope. And the magical thing about hope is that no state can ever defeat it. In the words of Emily Dickinson, hope is a thing with feathers that perches in the soul and sings the tune without the words and never stops at all. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup à Mary Lawlor pour ce cours sur les défenseurs de droits humains. C'est un parcours très élogieux. On voit qu'il y a toute une histoire derrière. Et c'est là qui a abouti à votre rôle aux Nations Unies en tant que rapporteur spécial. Merci beaucoup pour ce parcours qui va nous inspirer. Et nous tenons à vous rappeler qu'il y a un enregistreur graphique aussi que nous avons obligé de vous le mentionner. Il a la personne de commissaire de Percolab qui s'occupe de l'enregistrement graphique. Merci beaucoup pour cela. Nous allons maintenant vous introduire les différents panélistes de cette session. Nous en avons 3 au total. Donc, je vais comme ça, qui sont des brillants défenseurs des droits humains. Cindy Blastock, qui est a First Nation activist, executive director of First Nation Child and Family Caring Society of Canada. Cindy has over 30 years of experience working in child welfare and indigenous children rights and has published more than 55 articles on topics relating to reconciliation, indigenous theory, First Nation child welfare, human rights. Sylvie was honored to work with First Nation colleagues on a successful human rights challenge to Canada, inequitable provision of child and family services and failure to implement Jordan principle. This hard-fought litigation has resulted in hundreds of thousands of services being provided to First Nation children, youth, and family. Welcome, Cindy. La deuxième personne que nous allons accueillir, c'est Ali Sanou. Ali Sanou est le secrétaire général du mouvement burkinabé des droits de l'homme et des peuples et co-animateur du programme international de formation des droits humains d'EquiTalks. Il est juriste de formation. Ali est le secrétaire général du mouvement burkinabé des droits de l'homme et des peuples et un partenaire d'EquiTalks de longue date. Il est actuellement doctorant en droit international à l'université de Ouagadougou et est militant des droits humains. Il a participé au nom du mouvement burkinabé des droits de l'homme et des peuples et la Fédération internationale des ligues des droits de l'homme à plusieurs missions d'enquête sur les cas présumés de violation des droits humains. À ce titre, il contribue régulièrement au monitoring de la situation des droits humains au Burkina Faso et à l'élaboration de plusieurs rapports sur les violations des droits humains. En 2016, Ali a participé au programme international de formation des droits humains EquiTalks et est revenu au programme 2019 en tant que co-animateur. Bienvenue, Ali.
Oui, Jean-Paul, bonjour et merci.
Bonjour. La dernière personne que nous allons introduire, c'est Abdil Abdou Soufé. C'est une consultante, is a consultant and trainer on disability rights and inclusion in Jordan and past participant in the International Human Rights Training Program. Motivated by her personal experience with discrimination and stereotype, Adila actively fought for disability rights for more than a decade. Efforts have contributed to social institutional change in Jordan, enhancing accessibility for people with disability. Adil was involved in launching the campaign Sa Water, It's Time, meaning it's time, at the University of Jordan with call for equal opportunity of rights to education for people with disability through accessible infrastructure on campus. For this, she received the United Nations Voluntary MBC Hope Award in 2015. So welcome and thank you for being all here today. Voilà, nous allons start with the first question about human rights. As a human rights defender of the rights of LGBTI people in Cameroon, human rights for me is the rights that people will they have because they are simply human beings. So regardless of their sexual orientation, their color, skin color, and so forth and so on. So tell me, Adil, what do human rights mean to you? And how have your life experience influenced your understanding of human rights, please?
Thank you so much, and I'm so excited and thank you for this opportunity. Human rights for me, it belongs to each one of us equally. For me, the human rights is collected all the rights and prevent all the violations, preserving the dignity of every person. So for me, it's really affected and influenced me greatly when I began to understand that people's rights are violated and there is no voices to defend and demand these rights. For example, in my field of work on the rights of persons with disabilities and in my involvement in this field, I found that this group of people who has a disability, the right is ignored and it's really violated and no one is demanding them. So I realized that at this time, rights are not granted. Really, we have to fight to gain them again. We have to fight on our rights. This was my first experience when with this issue in the education in my university years. I faced many challenges. I have a disability, a physical disability. I'm a wheelchair user. You can imagine that I have to fast, not eat anything since morning until back home because there is no accessible toilet in my university. And also I have to call some people, like 5 people, to just carry me to have my classes because my classes upstairs, no elevators, everything we have just stairs. So I need really 5 people just to carry me to take my classes. So I began from this experience and I felt this is my right and I have to fight and to demand, and maybe sometimes I have to call some people. We need accessibility, we need reasonable accommodation. The person with disability and students with disability, they have to live like each other. And me and my colleague, we just make this campaign. It's called Sarwata, it's time. It's time to take our rights. It's time to fight on our rights. And really, we have a big achievement. Now we have 20 accessible toilets in our University of Jordan. And also we have many another achievements like more sign language interpreters, and we have audio library for the people with visual disability and so on. For me, we have a right, but we need to fight for them and to take it.
Thank you, Adil, for this insightful presentation about human rights for you. So Cindy, tell me, what about you? What do human rights mean to you, and how have your life experience influenced your understanding of human rights?
Thank you, Jean-Paul. I think one of the major pieces that it's means to me is really uplifting the human dignity of each person and respecting and learning to live with difference versus trying to overcome difference. And I put that in the context of colonialism for many Indigenous peoples around the world, where that dehumanization came in the form of trying to transpose our unique identity and our relationship with the land by others who wanted us to be like them, and to use the dehumanization of us as a commodity where they could then legitimize the taking of lands, resources, culture, language, and other things. My life experience in this work has really been addressing that type of dehumanization in Canada, a country that's often looked to for others to uphold human rights around the world, was at the same time transgressing the rights of First Nations children by providing them less public services because they're First Nations, by not addressing or owning the responsibility of dealing with the multi-generational trauma arising from residential schools, which were really re-education camps where many children died over 100 years that they were in operation in Canada. There are many things that I think human rights defenders do. I've been blessed to be taught by a lot of elders.
Cindy. Thank you for sharing with us this.
Thank you.
This definition of human rights we notice that it means a lot for you. So we will learn a lot from you today. Donc, Ali, dites-nous, en tant qu'activiste du mouvement, du mouvement des droits humains au Burkina, que signifient pour vous les droits humains et quelles sont les expériences qui ont marqué votre expérience en tant que défenseur des droits humains?
Ok, merci Jean-Paul et merci à EquiTalks également pour cette opportunité qui nous est offerte. Personnellement, en tant que défenseur des droits humains, pour moi, les droits humains, c'est la possibilité pour chacun de nous, aussi bien individuellement que collectivement, de vivre dans une société épanouie qui offre une égalité de chances pour tous ses membres sans aucune discrimination. Et ce, d'autant plus que, je l'avoue, ma vision à moi des droits humains a été influencée beaucoup par des luttes pour les droits humains au Burkina Faso. Dans notre pays, il n'y a pas aussi longtemps que ça, la violence en politique était très fréquente. On a assisté à beaucoup d'assassinats pour des mobiles politiques contre des personnalités et autres. Et en 1998, il y a eu un journaliste qui a été assassiné. Et suite à cet assassinat, il y a eu un mouvement populaire dans notre pays pour dire non à l'impunité des crimes de sang et des crimes économiques. Beaucoup de Burkinabés de ma génération ont beaucoup été influencés par ce mouvement populaire massif des Burkinabés qui en réalité réclamait plus de droits, plus d'égalité de chances pour chaque citoyen. Et j'avoue que j'ai beaucoup été influencé par ces luttes-là qui m'ont amené dès l'université à m'engager aussi bien au niveau du comité MBDHP que des associations d'étudiants pour poser des revendications principalement sur les questions d'accès à l'éducation, de la lutte contre l'impunité des crimes, de l'accès aux droits économiques, sociaux, culturels, etc., etc. Et j'avoue que c'est de là qu'est partie vraiment l'influence des droits humains, l'influence de ma vision sur les droits humains.
D'accord, merci beaucoup pour cette question qui nous ramène tout droit vers les différents défis que nous rencontrons en tant que défenseurs des droits humains. So please, Cindy, can you please tell me building of what Mary has shared, do you see similar challenges to defending human rights among indigenous human rights activists? Or how do you experience those challenges?
Sorry, the challenges to human rights activists, generally or specifically to women and LGBTI?
Oui.
Sorry, I just didn't hear you.
C'est une question véritablement à Cindy.
Maybe just say it again. I didn't hear you.
So, building on what Mary has shared previously, do you see similar challenges to defending human rights among indigenous human rights activists, please?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, I think our three panelists very, they just show how all human rights are linked together, and yourself, in that it's always about discrimination of some kind or another. It's always about some injustice being done, whether you're indigenous, whether you're LGBTI, whether you're a wheelchair user, or whether you're working in a country where there isn't inequality, and everybody is aiming for a society aiming for a society where there is equality. Now, in my work so far, I've seen so many additional risks faced by women and LGBTIQ, and I hear how they are disproportionately targeted with smears and online threats and attacks, and delegitimized as activists. And especially in the pandemic, I even heard of LGBTI people being blamed for the pandemic. And in conflict situations, where the whole issue of sexual violence against women, where sexual violence is a weapon used in conflict. And we hear reports currently from both Afghanistan and Ukraine about what's happening to women human rights defenders there. And I want to highlight one last thing before I stop. We are about to embark with the Special Rapporteur on Sexual Orientation and Gender Identity on a campaign on LGBTI defenders. So I urge you, if you could attend, anyone who's interested, the side event on Thursday, which at 12:30 Geneva time, and circulate. We're doing some videos and some testimonies and all those kind of things. So if you have Twitter or Facebook accounts, please circulate that.
Thank you, Mary, for this insightful intervention. But the question also goes to Cindy Blackstock. Take back what challenges you see. Yes, why do being a human rights defender?
Thank you, Jean-Paul. Thank you, Mary. I think
Among
one of the key
indigenous
things,
people, human rights activists, how do you experience those challenges?
I think in colonial societies, there's often a bunch of propaganda that happens by the state to legitimize its oppression of indigenous peoples. And so we have a population that is trained to dehumanize people, to look the other way when human rights abuses come forward, piercing through that normality and really engaging on a human level the other people in society to face that colonialism and that colonial history and address the solutions on the books is important. The other point I just raised is the importance of managing yourself as a human rights defender. To do right versus being right. That's important because you don't want to be ideological. You want to be in the service of the public interest. And to Mary's point, one of the best pieces of advice I was ever given was from an elder. He said, never fall in love with your organization. Never fall in love with your business card. Only fall in love with the children, because there may come a time when you have to sacrifice both those things for them. And that speaks to the courage that it's necessary to stand in the winds of discrimination.
Thank you, Cindy, for your contribution. Moi, en tant que défenseur des droits humains des personnes LGBT au Cameroun, nous sommes confrontés à de nombreux défis. Déjà, il faut noter que le Cameroun fait partie de ces pays-là qui condamnent les rapports entre les personnes de même sexe. Alors, notre travail en tant que défenseur des droits humains, on est exposé à de nombreuses violations. On a par exemple le meurtre d'Éric Lebembe, qui a fait le tour du monde, qui était un journaliste défenseur des droits humains. Alors, toi, Ali, quel est le plus grand défi que la communauté, ta communauté est confrontée et quels sont les défis des défenseurs des droits humains au Burkina?
Merci Jean-Paul. Pour être bref, je parlerai principalement de deux défis. Le premier défi, il est d'ordre beaucoup plus structurel, c'est la culture même des droits humains. Nous sommes malheureusement encore dans une société où les droits humains sont perçus comme étant des valeurs importées, venues de l'extérieur, qui ne sont pas des valeurs de notre cru. Donc, il arrive bien souvent que pour des droits les plus élémentaires, on trouve une opinion publique qui soit plus ou moins hostile à la réalisation ou à simplement la revendication de ces droits. Je me souviens qu'il y a 2 ans, dans le cadre de la lutte contre le terrorisme, notre organisation a fait un rapport sur des cas d'exécution sommaire et extrajudiciaire et qui a provoqué un véritable tollé au sein de l'opinion parce que beaucoup de nos compatriotes ne comprenaient pas pourquoi dans le contexte actuel de lutte contre le terrorisme, nous parlions du respect des droits humains. Et alors que nous savons qu'au regard des déficits démocratiques dans nos sociétés, la meilleure manière de faire basculer les tendances ou l'action gouvernementale, c'est de créer derrière chaque revendication une opinion publique forte, mobilisée. Donc, la culture des droits humains, la faiblesse de cette culture des droits humains constitue un obstacle et un défi à relever. Et le second, pour ne pas être très long, c'est la question même de la sécurité des défenseurs des droits humains. Aujourd'hui, nous avons vu que les espaces de liberté qui avaient été conquis par des décennies quand même d'activités ou de revendications de la société dans son ensemble, y compris des défenseurs des droits humains, sont remis en cause depuis l'avènement du phénomène terroriste. On observe une tendance de la société à accepter des restrictions de liberté en espérant avoir plus de sécurité. Malheureusement, à la fin, on n'a ni l'un ni l'autre et l'action des défenseurs des droits humains a tendance à être de plus en plus criminalisée. Donc, la question de la sécurité des défenseurs des droits humains devient dans ce contexte-là une question posée et à résoudre. Nous sommes depuis le 24 janvier sous un régime militaire suite à un coup d'État militaire, et on sait que qui dit régime militaire dit tendance à réduire les espaces de liberté, tendance à s'en prendre à tout ce qui est opposant, défenseur des droits humains, tout ce qui est critique dans la société. Donc, malheureusement, nous pressentons que dans les semaines et les mois à venir, la question de la sécurité des défenseurs des droits humains et de ceux qui auront des voix discordantes sera un défi majeur à relever.
Merci beaucoup, Ali, pour ton intervention sur la situation des défenseurs des droits humains dans nos pays d'Afrique francophone. So, Adil, please tell me, as a young woman with disability activist or young woman disability activist, can you speak to the role of women human rights defenders and women's organizations in disability justice work?
Yes, we as a women have pivotal role to play in building our society. We have taken our multiple roles in this context, such as education, work, and development in general. But the role has always been incomplete because due to discrimination. So we face many discrimination based on gender and sex. And also for personal disabilities and women with disabilities, we face not double or compound discrimination. It's a multiple discrimination, like as CRPD mentioned that. And also as a women with disabilities, we have really a major role. We have to make it and to change it. And we also process on this change. But as I mentioned before, we have many discrimination in our Arab countries and in other countries that make us limited on the ground, and also the people who ask to us and how they their attitude to the women with disabilities. So because of that, we have to fight on this violation.
Thank you, Adil, for your contributions. And Cindy, once again, most of your work centers around engaging the Canadian government around questions to protect and respect the rights of Indigenous young people. How do you better engage with governments, duty bearer, around accountability and responsibility? Especially, and this is true in all our contexts, when those of us who are in the margin of more often targeted than others are upholding the status quo.
Thank you, Jean-Paul. You know, when the state itself is the perpetrator of the human rights abuses and we're trying to hold them accountable, one of the first things we need to determine is, do they know about the human rights abuse and do they have solutions to fix it? Because often they will use official procedure to try and mask action and continue to perpetrate that human rights abuse. Too often we get sucked in, or I did, to doing reports documenting a problem and creating a solution to which they would not implement. And then they call another thing. And this would go on and the people would continue to have the rights violation. So I think the key is, when they clearly know that the human rights abuse is happening, when they have a solution to fix it and they choose not to do it, then the conversation is not with the government, it's with the population. We need to engage in social movements along with legal recourse, and we also need to take political recourse. Because governments in that context do not create change, they respond to change. And that's where we've seen great examples around the globe of, for example, the civil rights movement, where governments have changed their positions only because of that change in society itself and being forced to change. And those are really key. And using the UN system as one instrument in the toolbox to be able to force the government to act on the human rights remedies is a key piece of it. So I think that that's important. And the other thing is prepare for government to retaliate against you. They did to me. But it was thanks to groups like Frontlines Defenders that can help you, support you, and using that retaliation to bring further attention to the human rights abuse and stand up in the winds of that kind of retaliation.
Thank you, Cindy. And so, Mary Lawlor, come back to you. What do you think about this government accountability? What is your opinion about it?
Well, I agree absolutely with Cynthia, because, you know, at the end of the day, you have to get the population behind you. You have to build your networks in order to force change. And it is a difficult work in very many societies. I recognize that. But, you know, as Cynthia says, like, if the governments don't listen, you've monitored the violations, you've given the solutions, and yet you're not getting anywhere. Where can you turn? You turn to your networks, you turn to the population, you try and get them in. That's how we got equal marriage in Ireland, for example, and reproductive rights. And Ireland had been a very conservative country. But, you know, there's a lot of ways now, I think, that I you know, if you take a look at me, there are new ways from the time when I was young. And these, that human rights defenders seek accountability and you know, through social media, through campaigns, through petitions and mobilizations. And for example, I presented a report to the Human Rights Council last week on anti-corruption human rights defenders. And I highlighted a number of instances where anti-corruption human rights defenders had exposed huge corruption at high levels and forced change, particularly in the way medical supplies and equipment was being defrauded in the COVID crisis. But they forced huge change and they got huge results. But it's not only online that human rights defenders are doing it. It's out in the communities, as I said, like Cynthia said. You know, it's building relationships, it's building trust and networks, which equips them with the information and the tools that you all need. And I'm quite sure that Hadil and Ali are very experienced at this, that they know that, you know, by themselves, you need solidarity, you need people to stand beside you. And I think, you know, persistence, you never underestimate persistence. You just have to keep at it and at it and at it. And eventually something will happen. And with human rights defenders who are so brave, I think, for instance, of Phyllis Omida in Kenya, she was a land rights defender and environmental human rights defender, and she fought for 12 years against a smelting plant that the local authorities had that was poisoning both the people and the environment. And she won eventually, despite physical attacks and harassment. She got justice in 2020. So the morale is never give up, keep at it.
Thank you, Cindy. Just a quick reminder. Thank you, Mary Lawlor, I'm sorry. Just do not forget to post your question in the chat box, so we will address it after this session. So use it. So, alors, Ali, dis-moi un peu, le mouvement existe depuis 30 ans, le mouvement burkinabé des droits de l'homme et des peuples. C'est depuis 30 ans et il a documenté et soutenu les citoyens pendant plusieurs changements de régime et conflits. Malgré la violence permanente, la société civile reste dynamique et diversifiée dans le pays. Quelles sont les opportunités que vous voyez pour les défenseurs des droits humains travaillant dans des contextes difficiles comme le Burkina Faso, l'Afghanistan et aussi l'Ukraine très récemment? Quelles sont les opportunités que vous en entrevoyez?
OK, merci. Merci Jean-Paul. Pour moi, l'une des opportunités et la plus importante à mes yeux, c'est l'éveil des consciences quand même de plus en plus visible et palpable au sein de l'opinion publique. Parce que même si, comme je l'ai dit comme défi, il reste qu'il y a la culture des droits humains qu'il nous faut améliorer et approfondir auprès de beaucoup de nos concitoyens, Il y a aussi qu'il faut reconnaître que certains types de violations visibles ou voilà, des violations qui sont véritablement, certaines violations des droits humains ne sont plus acceptées par les populations. Et cela contraint beaucoup les autorités à revoir leur manière de faire, leur politique, etc. Donc, l'éveil de conscience populaire, les revendications autour des droits humains constituent une opportunité. Une seconde opportunité, c'est la prise de conscience même des défenseurs des droits humains sur la nécessité de travailler en réseautage. Pendant longtemps, dans les organisations de la société civile et les défenseurs des droits humains, notamment pour pouvoir attirer des financements, ont travaillé beaucoup dans un environnement concurrentiel. Mais de plus en plus, face à l'énormité des défis qui se posent à eux, face à la réalité du terrain, ils comprennent que travailler en réseau et en synergie les rend beaucoup plus forts. C'est ainsi qu'ici, on constate que de plus en plus, il y a des actions qui ne sont pas menées par une seule organisation, mais par une coalition d'organisations qui regroupe aussi bien les défenseurs des droits humains, là j'entends les organisations des droits humains, comme on en connaît, comme le MBDHP, mais aussi des organisations de droits catégoriels telles que les syndicats des travailleurs, les organisations de femmes, les organisations de jeunes et autres. Et ça constitue une opportunité. Et la dernière, si je peux le dire, c'est la question du rétablissement, pas aussi rapide qu'on le souhaite, mais qui est une réalité de l'équilibre de genre dans nos sociétés. Nous passons de sociétés foncièrement patriarcales à des sociétés où de plus en plus, par l'action de beaucoup d'organisations et de beaucoup d'individus, de leaders d'opinion, que ce soit des leaders religieux, politiques ou autres, on constate qu'il y a de plus en plus un équilibre de genre qui se fait. Alors que dans une société, lorsque l'équilibre de genre s'améliore, je précise, ce n'est pas encore au rythme que nous souhaitons, mais il y a des points importants que nous engageons, que des acquis importants que nous engageons. Donc ça, c'est une opportunité pour avoir une société beaucoup plus respectueuse de l'ensemble des droits humains.
Okay, merci beaucoup, Ali, pour cette intervention sur la situation du Burkina et d'autres pays en situation de crise. So tell me, Adil, the impact of the pandemic has increased the digital communication channel worldwide, and the momentum of and plurality of social justice movement has created an opening of new spaces and pathway for different voices to be heard. As a disability justice and inclusion specialist, Adil, do you see as the greatest opportunity for human rights defenders?
I think Corona pandemic has a huge effect in a negative and positive way. I think on positive way, we have access to services and information in a digital form become fair for all. And for people with disability, they obtain their rights, and because they were provided in accessible forms, and they can access to information without any barriers or challenges. For example, for me, I just built my own channel on account. I just create accounts on Instagram and social media that I can just promoting the services and accessibility that based in Jordan. And it's really fair for all because I provided sign language interpreters, and also for social media and online, it's very, very useful, and everyone, they can contact to each other. But on negative side, I think it was very clear some sectors like government and also others, they didn't provide us, especially on education, employment. Many people with disabilities, they lost their jobs in Jordan because they didn't make accessibility for them to welcome them in services and also in building. And I think sometimes also our health sectors is disaster because they didn't provide everything for people with disabilities. Because of that, sometimes the pandemic was have a negative side for us. And also, I think it's a great opportunity, but we need maybe some people and some governmental or civil society and also the private sector, they didn't cooperate with to each other and support each other. So it doesn't meet our ambition.
Thank you, Adil. So to change things, we are going to do sort of a kind of Latin question. What sustains you? What gives you hopes? For me, what gives me hopes is the fact that I will change the life of people, and my family and my friends are also there to sustain me. They give me a lot of hope. So tell me, Cindy, what gives you hope? What sustains you?
What gives me hope is actually seeing a generation of children growing up, learning about human rights, but more importantly, understanding how they can peacefully and respectfully stand up for human rights. And with that, they have an appreciation that they have a duty to stand up for human rights and environmental rights together, and to not view that standing up for one human rights cause is sufficient. We have to stand up for the values of human rights, which means we stand in solidarity across all people seeking human dignity and uplifting human rights. And that generation of kids, that's what gives me real hope.
Merci beaucoup, Cindy. Et Adil, qu'est-ce qui vous, what sustains you? What gives you joy? Can you tell us?
For me, the motivated things, I think, when I saw someone's life has changed, because many people here, they felt their life is just end. When I support them to come back to the life and affect and support other communities, and this makes me supportive, and this is the joy of my life, to change the other people's life, and also to loud voice my rights, as I have a good personality and a strong personality. I just loud voices my rights and tell people we have a rights, and you have to give us and to live like each other. Yeah.
Thank you, Adil. Ali, est-ce que tu nous dis qu'est-ce qui te motive, qu'est-ce qui te donne de la joie, c'est quoi exactement en tant que défenseur des droits humains?
Comme je disais, aujourd'hui, dans notre pays, malheureusement, nous assistons à la résurgence des phénomènes tels que les exécutions sommaires et extrajudiciaires. Il est arrivé dans un passé pas trop éloigné que par l'action du MBDHP, des personnes qui étaient sur le point d'être exécutées soient purement et simplement libérées. Et c'est ainsi qu'il y a, je crois, 1 ou 2 ans, j'ai reçu dans mon bureau quelqu'un qui était venu nous dire merci parce qu'il a été arrêté par des militaires qui le conduisaient, voilà, les yeux bandés, probablement pour l'exécuter. Et en cours de route, ils ont reçu un appel. Et suite à l'appel, le chef de la mission qui dit aux autres, arrêtez, la mission a échoué. Et de fil en aiguille, ce dernier s'est rendu compte que sa famille avait saisi le MBDHP, qui a saisi le procureur, qui a tout fait pour que ce monsieur échappe à l'exécution. Et vous n'imaginez pas la joie de ce monsieur lorsqu'il nous remerciait, l'émotion et tout. Finalement, la plus grande récompense pour les défenseurs des droits humains, c'est de vivre de tels moments, de savoir que les actions que nous avons portées ont permis les actions que nous avons menées ont porté des fruits. Quelquefois à des échelles, je dirais, moins dramatiques. Ça peut être des personnes qui ont été licenciées de façon abusive et qui finalement, grâce au conseil, à l'accompagnement des défenseurs des droits humains, même s'ils ne sont pas réintégrés, obtiennent une indemnité voilà, pour pouvoir mener d'autres activités pour des personnes en détention abusive qui sont libérées. Et c'est la plus grande satisfaction de nous, défenseurs des droits humains, savoir que nos actions peuvent contribuer à un moment donné à changer, à améliorer des vies et à donner le sourire à certaines personnes. Et ça, ça procure une joie qu'il est difficile, je l'avoue, de décrire.
Merci beaucoup, Ali. So, Mary Lawlor, we know that you have previously shared with us, but can you remind us what sustains you, what gives you joy for doing this incredible work since many years?
Me? Well, I think today it's all of you, because we all need to refresh ourselves. And the way we refresh ourselves is we dip into the spirits of others. So listening to you, Jean-Paul, and listening to Ali and that amazing story about the halting the execution, and listening to Hadil, who just keeps thinking of new things to do to improve the rights of people with disabilities, and listening to Cynthia and her wisdom about, bringing the community with you. I mean, these are lessons that we all need, and we all need to hear them often, and we need to be together and to talk together and to dip into each other's thinking. I always remember one of the most, I suppose, difficult times in Frontline was we had this woman human rights defender in Uzbekistan who had been basically held for 8 years without any kind of lawyer, or she was in solitary confinement, and there was a noose put in her cell to try and persuade her to commit suicide. And eventually she was moved to a cell with other people, and just because it was her birthday, we decided we'd send her flowers, even if they never arrived. So we sent flowers to the prison in Uzbekistan, and miraculously they arrived there. And she wrote to us afterwards through this guard that had been more humane to her, that it was the best day of her life, that the flowers didn't just give her sustenance and hope and renewal, it gave all the other prisoners there as well. So I think we have to keep looking for the flowers everywhere.
Thank you very much for this response. We are going to give the floor to Paul to share with us the graphic record from Percolab to present like the moment of the talk. Thank you.
Hi everyone, thank you. And it's been beautiful to listen to you this afternoon. And so I just kind of like going to speak through what I've heard very briefly. So we're here to put heart, humanity, and defending human rights. And as we've heard from Mary and others about how we need to kind of bring in and learn through resilience, persistence, and self-reliance, we have to fight, we have to take action, and be persistent. And to kind of think back, and I didn't run away. We looked for the opportunities, change comes from within. How can we change our vision? How can we document the abuses? But at the same time, we're leaning towards how can we live with our differences? And how can we make this and invite in the spirit that wants to lead that as we fight the violence, issues around gender, propaganda, the politics, etc., that are in our world, to have concrete change. And as we're listening through, the other thing is like, how do we treat trauma? How do we kind of like note repression justifies the action because it means we're pushing against the status quo? And how can we have hope in the thing? And that's the thing with the feathers. And how do we make it as natural as breathing? Because human rights belongs to all, pour tout le monde. And how do we create a respected society? And so I really appreciate all the work you're doing, and thank you. And I invite you, as you were listening, and in whichever listening lens that you had, just to kind of put into the chat, what stood out for you as you were listening? Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. During the presentation, participants were asked to use the Q&A box to ask questions. So the first question is for Mary. Given the current global pandemic and conflict in many parts of the world, what do you think are the principal challenges human rights defenders are facing at this time? A reprisal from government biggest issue, for example. This question goes to Mary.
Well, when it comes to conflict, the situation is extremely, extremely difficult. And for the challenges facing human rights defenders are magnified, obviously, because first of all, they're trying to stay alive. It depends on the nature of the conflict, of course. If it's a war, like for example in Yemen or Syria or Ukraine or South Sudan, or the question is, how do you stay alive, and how do you also try and do your human rights work if you want? For example, there is a member of a human rights organization in Ukraine at the moment, and she was trained as a nurse. So what she is doing is she is driving for 12 hours a day from 8 to 8, delivering food and medicine and water to old people who aren't able to move, to people with disabilities who can't move, and to people with terminal illness who can't move. And I find that quite extraordinary. But I think in any situation, you have to do a sort of an analysis of where, if any, are there, what is your best way to protect yourself, first of all, both online and offline, and do a security plan and a risk assessment, and then see if there is any possibility to do anything. I mean, it may be that you have to lie low for a while. It may be that you have to change and adapt your work. For example, in war in Syria and in Yemen and in Ukraine at the moment, a lot of human rights defenders in Ukraine are documenting war crimes. So that, and they've switched their work, like that woman who is the nurse. Now they're going into bringing medicine and food and water and documenting war crimes. So I think everyone has to adapt in conflict. And this is not for me to say. I've only been visiting countries in conflict. So I don't have, for example, Ali's experience, but I think you have to do a risk analysis, a security analysis, and see if there is any possibility for you to be able to do your work. You'll always be able to do human rights education. I have always felt that from listening to human rights defenders who have changed their work in conflict, that there is one thing that you can do, and that's human rights education.
You, Mary. The second question goes to Cindy. I watched an American report that highlighted the indigenous women have disappeared and that the authorities have not recognized the report of violence and kidnapping of women. Several thousand, only a few hundred have been officially reported and documented by authorities. Does the same problem exist in Canada or elsewhere?
Thank you for that question. Sadly, the answer to that question is yes, it does exist in Canada and in other countries. It's really one of the conditions of dehumanization that comes along with colonialism. Is too often we start to think in colonial countries that the worst injustices are over, a dark chapter in a country's history, when indeed actually that is not only a myth in many cases. It blinds us to seeing the injustices that are still going on. In Canada, we have something called the Murdered and Missing Indigenous Women and Girls Inquiry that documented the situation of missing and murdered Indigenous women and proposed a whole array of solutions. To date, Canada has not implemented those solutions. They welcome them and they just create plans to create a plan. So this is another situation where the public itself has got to pressure the governments in these respective areas, United States, Canada, other colonial countries, to take action, to implement the solutions that are already on the books that would prevent many Indigenous women and girls from going missing and others from dying. This really is a life and death thing that you can take action on. Just let people know that this is something that matters to you. It's not just an issue for Indigenous peoples, it's a matter of, for all of us who are justice and dignity-seeking peoples.
The third question goes to Adil. Le droit des personnes en situation de handicap sont souvent discriminés et exclus, limitant leur participation sociale, notamment en Afrique. Que pouvons-nous faire en tant que citoyens?
La question est à qui?
Je vais répondre rapidement. Le droit des personnes en situation de handicap qui sont souvent discriminées et exclues, limitant leur participation sociale, notamment en Afrique. Que pouvons-nous faire en tant que citoyens? Dont les personnes handicapées sont souvent discriminées et exclues de l'espace civique et la participation sociale, comme en Afrique. Donc, que pouvons-nous faire en tant que citoyens pour remédier à cela? What can we do to address that?
So the question for me, Hadil or Ali? Can you hear me?
Oui.
Yes. So the question for me or for Ali?
For you.
Okay. So I think the people with disabilities.
The question has been asked in French. That's why I asked in French, but I can ask in English if you want.
Okay.
The rights of people.
Yeah, go ahead. You are muted.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
I'm sorry. Les droits des personnes en situation de handicap sont souvent discriminés et exclus, limitant leur participation sociale, notamment en Afrique. Que pouvons-nous faire en tant que citoyens?
I think we have to have cooperation with private sector and government and also civil society to just fighting on our rights. It's discriminated, but we have a good, maybe we have to shift the mindset of people with disability toward them because unfortunately we have a negativity towards people with disability. They cannot do anything. So first of all, I think we have to promote the awareness about the disability rights and how people with disability they can live. And also we have the maybe to break the barriers on accessibility, the lack of accessibility and reasonable accommodation. Maybe we have to have a good communication with other sectors to provide the accessibility and reasonable accommodation, and also to implement all the laws and the conventions rights of persons with disability together.
Thank you all for your participation. Merci beaucoup, Ali. Thank you, Adil. Thank you, Cindy. Thank you, Mary, for participating in this session and sharing with all these incredible insights from your experience and this important work you are doing in your respective country. Now I welcome André Bolio, who is the president of the PITAS, part of Director, to share some final word of gratitude. Thank you, and thank you for was a great pleasure to moderate this session.
Hello, everyone. Bonjour tout le monde. I believe you cannot see me unless I make sure the video works. So hopefully you can see me. I don't want to take too much of your time. Merci tout le monde d'être venu si nombreux. On a eu quelques centaines de personnes qui ont assisté à la séance d'aujourd'hui. I want to thank you. I want to thank everyone who participated today. Obviously, Juanita for a thoughtful introduction. Jean-Paul for his deft moderation throughout. Mary Lawlor, our esteemed keynote, who gave us an inspiring story of persistence, starting with encyclopedia sales. So that was one of the more original moments of the day. And of course, a very lively discussion with everyone led by Adil, who shared with us how difficult it is to bring the human rights perspective to the disabled community. Cindy, who is always such a strong voice in Canada for First Nations dignity and the fight against dehumanizing and otherizing Indigenous Canadians. I want to thank Ali du Burkina, je crois, qui nous a parlé de l'importance de la culture des droits humains dans un milieu où on ne la trouve pas forcément. I am very heartened that so many of you chose to join, that so many smart questions were asked. It's a privilege to be part of EquiTalks and a privilege to be part of today's event. I encourage everyone to stay in touch with EquiTalks, to contribute what you can to our good works, and to propose collaborations as EquiTalks works in Canada, but also in many parts of the world. I understand my next task will be to hand over the rein to Nika, who will walk us through the networking event and the specifics of it. But thank you again to our moderators, our panelists, our special guest, Mary, everyone who participated. And of course, you see the sponsors on the page here. EquiTalks has many friends in government, in the private sector, friends who've been with us for a long time and without whom we could not do the work that we do and try and change the world a little bit for the better. So thank you to TD, Power, Alliance, Bell, CGI, and the rest of our sponsors. And then I'll hand it over to Nika.
Merci tout le monde. Thank you very much for being with us today. We are now making our way to the networking event. There should be a link provided in your email for all of those who registered. If you haven't registered for a networking event, use the link provided in the chat to register and receive your Zoom link. Once there, we'll provide new instructions, but it's an opportunity to chat informally with all our amazing panelists, Mary Lawlor, Cindy Blackstock, Hadil Abousoufé, Ali Sanou, and of course, our moderator, Jean-Paul and Emma. Thank you again for being here, and we look forward to seeing you in the other space.
Merci et au revoir.
Yes.